It's the worst of yesterday's CBC, the show where I watch the CBC so you don't have to. Now, thanks to my boss, whose office we've commandeered while he's out, to yell at the commies running the country. Now, quick note, this is the worst of the CBC for August 19th, even though this video is coming out on August 20th. So if you're watching it today, we're talking about the past, and if you're watching it not on the August 20th, you're in the future, in which case you have a jetpack, you don't really care what I'm saying. So, I watched the National for Monday, August 19th, and it's official, SNC-Lavalin is out of the news cycle. So it's going to be a big show of omissions. Now, what is the worst story they talked about? Well, it was kind of a tie, and it was kind of the same story. It's how they covered the Elections Canada news. First off, there was a lot of panic over the story of Maxime Bernier has now said that climate change isn't settled science, so now it's an electoral issue, so you can't advertise on it. Listen, these laws are ridiculous, and Bernier said they're ridiculous. Thank you, Maxime Bernier, for doing this, because these laws have negatively affected me personally, and I hate them so much. I can't even talk about how they've affected me, because the new election laws put under Trudeau are so absurd and anti-free speech. But thank you, Maxime Bernier, for doing this. I find it hilarious. I am cheering inside, and I can't tell you why. You know what, Maxime Bernier, I would... If Maxime Bernier or Andrew Scheer has the balls to come out and say something amazing like, climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, it's caused by drag queen story time, done. Vote for that man. I will, gangs in New York, drag people out of their homes and force them to vote for whatever politician says something as hilarious and wonderful as that. Now, the other horribly covered story was right after that. There was moral panic over Andrew Scheer. What did Andrew Scheer do? Well, the Conservatives have reduced the price of journalists coming to travel the campaign. They've turned it to about $11,500 for journalists to come onto the planes and travel with them. The NDP are charging $45,000, and the CBC is panicked. Does this count as election tampering? Are they subsidizing journalists? Is this illegal? Oh no, what's going to happen? Are we going to forget the fact that the Trudeau government has promised $600 million to just bribe the entire media? No, that's fine. And the CBC, and Katie Simpson, we will not take any subsidized trip. We're going to get to the bottom of this one. Oh, yes, we are. Is the Conservatives charging less to journalists considered electoral tampering? If that's considered electoral tampering, but bribing the media with $600 million isn't, then I don't know what is. So that was fake news. Now, the whole CBC, I want to give a 10 out of 10 the Rosemary Barton scale, but let's just talk about some of the omissions. Big omission number one, SNC-Lavalin, out of the news cycle. Lasted less than a week, which is less than the story about Donald Trump. Is Donald Trump responsible for El Paso? They covered that for over a week, even though it wasn't a story. It was just conjecture. But we're going to get into that later. So what could they really have said about SNC? I mean, you say, they've already said everything. Well, how about the fact that on Wednesday there's going to be an ethics commission hearing? The fact that the Liberals have voted against ethics further inquiry before. They could, find out what the Liberal MPs, list them on the ethics commission, ask them how they're going to vote, go to their constituents, say, is this important to you, how your MP votes on this? And they might go, oh, yes, may, no. Is there a story? You can always do the news. You could put pressure on politicians. Isn't that the function of the fourth estate? Supposedly, allegedly. Now, other big news that they are not covering, and one is Lebanon and Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, is now trying to start a war in Israel. And the way they're doing that is they're sending fire-filled balloons. They're copying what the Palestinians done and just floating fire-filled balloons, and now the north of Israel is on fire. And the reason they're doing this is they're doing low-scale, low-level violence to provoke reaction because they know the media won't cover, why is Lebanon sending fire balloons into Israel? Right? But then Israel has forced to retaliate. Israel bombs Lebanon, right? I can bet you $1 billion you hear this. Israel starts bombing campaign on Lebanon. It is response into alleged attacks, blah, blah, blah. Alleged, it's there right now. And I had a friend who said Israel should just send fire balloons back over. That's a brilliant thing. So Israel, if you're listening, on Gaza border and in Lebanon, fill balloons with helium, light candles on them, and just send thousands of fire balloons into Gaza and Lebanon. If they're doing it, just do it back. And then the media will be forced to cover this. Now, another thing that needed to be covered, but isn't, another gigantic omission, is there was a protest that turned violent that was sponsored by the Pakistani embassy in Toronto. Now, this is in response to Kashmir and the Khalistanis and all that. So it was a big Islamist approach where pro-India people were assaulted, spat on. There's video of it. And the police did nothing, right? The police were there, and I only saw them push the Indian guy out. So isn't it worth noting? I mean, we're covering the Hong Kong protest. Isn't it worth noting that a foreign country is sponsoring protests on our soil to another country that turned violent? Doesn't that doesn't that tickle anyone's, news radar sense? Tickles mine. So complete collapse of the fourth estate. And everything is just so terrible. But I will say, okay, so this was going to get a 10 out of 10 on the Rosemary Barton scale because I did watch the National, but it's going to get a 7 out of 10. Why? Well, it gets plus 1 point or minus 1 Rosemary Barton because Rosemary Barton was there tonight. So I never had to look at Rosemary Barton's face. So that takes it down on the Rosemary Barton scale, of course. So now we're at 9 out of 10. And I will say, call a spade, CBC had a very good coverage of the border crisis in the States. They did a special where they followed around a border agent who was a Trump supporter who made a case for the wall. They treated his argument with respect and responsibility. They let him make the humanitarian case for the wall. They actually listened, and you saw on the CBC the other side of the issue. For once, it was all done. They also talked to a rancher who was negatively affected by the cartels and the illegal immigrants coming across his land and what he has to deal with. And they didn't strawman him. They didn't make him seem like a racist. They showed his points in context. So that takes off 2 whole points. I mean, it should have been a 20 out of 10 on the Rosemary Barton scale because of just all the omissions and the fact that SNC's out of the scale. But I'm going to give it a 10. But it loses 1 point for no Rosemary Barton. Nice. And then 2 points for that very well done, actually worth watching coverage of the U.S. border crisis. So that was the worst of the CBC for August 19th, 2019. So I will see you all Wednesday night on Uninterrupted.